So let's look at a few challenges of working with people with narrow ISAs versus wide ISAs. Good morning. Happy Tuesday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand and it is perfect. All right. Already a busy Tuesday. Had a mentorship call this morning leading into a clinic day. First clinic day after vacation, so that will be fun. Today's Q&A is a conversation that I had with Eli. Eli's a coach here in Indiana, go Indiana. And we talked about a couple of presentations, one with narrow ISAs with the extreme hip internal rotation. So I would refer you to the video that we did on YouTube about that so you get an idea of what you're looking at there. And then we moved into some wide ISA questions that I think a lot of people run into. So we have clients with a lot of body mass, and that actually becomes some interference to recapturing some movement and shape change that we talk about. And then we actually narrowed it down very specifically to a shoulder issue, again, dealing with somebody that presents with the wide ISA archetype. So I think that this conversation will be useful to many people. So thank you to Eli for your participation. I appreciate you. And everybody have a great Tuesday. We will be back tomorrow morning with another Q&A. So have a great day.
All right. So I have two clients I train that present with what I believe to be second layer compensations. And a few weeks ago, you made a video on the ER-IR field of shoulder flexion and hip flexion. And one of my clients in particular is a narrow ISA that presents with quite a bit of internal rotation and limitations in ER. And I guess my question is that how much does that change the field, and what considerations for training her would be kind of useful, and what things to watch out for? Because I kind of stay away from a lot of things because of this possible limitation.
Okay.
So
yeah. Okay. Can I stop you so we can dig into this? Okay. So when you see somebody that has a lot of internal rotation and a limitation in external rotation, you have a very significant anterior orientation situation. Okay. So the only way under those circumstances, especially with a narrow ISA, so a narrow ISA should be biased towards external rotation with limitation in internal rotation. But let me get my pelvis and I'll show you.
Cool.
So what we should see is, so I have a retroverted acetabulum that would bias me towards external rotation and limit me towards internal rotation. But if I continue to anteriorly orient the pelvis forward, I'm going to switch sides here. If I continue to anteriorly orient this where I can get the acetabulum to face more downward, what it does is it untwists the ligamentous structure of the hip. And now I have this really freed up internal rotation situation. Because of the anterior orientation and the musculature that's above the trochanter, though, I have the limitation in external rotation. So the first order of business under every circumstance is I got to bring this pelvis back. I got to bring the thorax back, right, at the same time. Okay. And what that will do, it'll give me a position where I can start to recapture the relative motions between the bones. Because what you have right now is you have a pelvis that's probably oriented like that and then forward. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah.
So now the thing you got to be careful of when you're trying to reorient somebody that is a narrow ISA archetype is that if I promote too much muscle activity in that posterior lower area, I'm not going to see a change. So you got to be really, really careful with the positions that you're going to start with. Chances are this person also has limited early ER in all hip motions. So like the hip flexion would be limited, the straight leg raise would be limited, things like that. And so you have to make sure that you're not moving them into a position where they will immediately try to utilize a compensatory strategy, because this person will use lumbar flexion, traditional lumbar flexion, as the external rotation right? So
Okay.
you ask somebody to posteriorly orient their pelvis during an activity in the hopes of recapturing the orientation. What's going to happen is you're going to get that lumbar flexion as a substitution, and then you won't see the changes in the hips like you want. So you're probably going to have to go with something that would be more unilateral. And you've probably seen me like talk to death about like cross connect activities and things like that. And that's probably where you're going to go, or you're going to use some form of a rolling activity with a limited amount of hip flexion.
Okay.
Does that
That
make
makes
sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And again, so you've got to think orientation first, because you're not going to be able to reacquire relative motions in the pelvis or in the thorax without the reorientation first.
I see.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and with her, she's got a bit of a um kind of a I hate this, but kyphotic kind of sway back posture.
Absolutely. So she's probably going to be close to end game, if not end game.
Okay.
And so I would refer you to those videos as well.
Cool. Yeah.
Because there's I believe I have a narrow ISA end game video.
Yeah.
Right. End game
And
sounds so severe sometimes, doesn't it? I should probably change that terminology. It was just made sense.
yeah.
But yeah, so you got to start there though. Right.
Gotcha.
So she's
And
getting so if she appears to be kyphotic, so what she is she's actually bent. She's bent forward, and that's her inhalation strategy. So what she's going to do is she's going to be pulling down on her sternum and up on her pubis at the same time to create that bend in the back, right, just below the level of the scapula, and that's her inhale strategy.
okay.
Okay, so again, it's like number one, you don't want to be driving rectus abdominis when you're trying to reorient the pelvis. And again, that's why a unilateral strategy tends to be more effective under those circumstances.
Gotcha. It makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Um,
But you've got to count it. And the reason is she doesn't have that ER field to superimpose the IR on. So everything becomes an orientation for her IR. So she's driving everything into the ground by orienting it forward, and then her whole center of gravity is way over her foot, correct?
yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
she's definitely tending to be pronating as well, like in her feet. And
Yeah. She's just jamming into the ground. So that pronation again is her IR into the ground, because she's got to use some form of an orientation to create it, because she doesn't have the ER first. You've got to buy her an ER space, then she can IR under normal circumstances with normal relative motions.
gotcha.
Okay. You got a second question?
Yeah. So the client I have right after her is again, I believe a second layer or second compensatory strategy, and he is a big guy, wide ISA, and definitely in obese categories. And he
Like big belly kind of thing?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I guess my question with this one in particular is actually in terms of like obesity and working with clients in that realm, what kind of activities would you choose to get them to be able to leverage, external obliques to close the ISA, or if you can, or if it's more a matter of getting that weight loss. And then I noticed too, when somebody has lost a bunch of weight, that it's still very difficult to get that ISA to close, to leverage your abs and hamstrings and things properly. I didn't know if you have any strategies for that as well.
So you have a space issue under those circumstances. So you have a magnification of the abdominal contents. And so number one, we would see the same things that would be associated with pregnancy in regards to trying to create the dynamics of the ISA, right? Okay. So under the circumstances, what you're going to have to do to exercise comfortably, first and foremost, if you've got to create expansion where you can create expansion, which is going to be more of the posterior aspect of it, right? So that will be number one. If they can get up and down from the floor, you can use the floor to create some anterior posterior shape change and compress some of the rib cage under those circumstances. So again, rolling activities become useful and important in regards to restoring some of the relative motions. Okay. But you're right as far as, okay, we have to, if there's an obesity situation, I have adipose that is just taking up space. I have to make space. The rule doesn't change, right? So under certain circumstances, we create expansion to create space. But if I have something that is occupying space, I have to reduce that, right? And so that's a food issue. That's not an exercise issue. And so
Right.
they need to understand that as well. And then it's just a matter of selecting activities that allow you to maintain expansion where you can capture it. So, heavy deadlifts, back squats, and things like that, not really going to help you very much, because all you're going to do is get more of that posterior compressive strategy that's going to limit what your movement options are going to be. Kind of makes sense, right?
Right.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so that's a tough conversation to have with people. You say, look, we're going to be limited on our exercise selection for a while, but here's where you double down on the food thing, right? That's going to be the thing that's most important. A lot of your activities are going to be split stance oriented, and they're going to be unilateral in nature, because what you're going to try to do is you're going to try to make as much turning possible as possible. Again, within their capabilities. You're not going to drive them, too hard into any one thing. And then you want them to, one, feel the satisfaction of the exercises and activities. Right. And so again, you're going to need to build some variety in some way, shape, or form. But again, it's not about driving them harder and harder and harder into a position.
Right. Right. And I kind of I kind of stumbled my way to this point, trying to figure it out. But it was interesting because I had both of these clients occur at the same day with the same kind of epiphany with it all. I hate to use that word, but
okay, it happens.
and I was like, wow, what are the odds and of it happening the same day? So, those are the main questions I've had with regards to that. So
cool. What else can I do for you? You got a little bit of time.
Okay. So what's another question I have? Manubrial expansion. And you posted a video again a few weeks back about that. I have a client that has a bit of a down pump handle, and also is a secondary compensation, concavity in the ribs, but a wide ISA. And I'm trying to get her to not be in pain and shoulder flexion. And I'm gonna go out on a limb and say you're gonna tell me the same thing a minute ago. Yep.
Yeah. So the down pump handle is and she's narrow.
She's wide, and she has a bit of concavity in her.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
And the biggest thing is that she can get to shoulder flexion, but we can't. It seems as though she would have full shoulder flexion, but we can't get to where we can load shoulder flexion without pec taking over all the motion and biceps pulling on them.
So you need to make some space. You need to make some space first. So you have to have posterior lower expansion to get through the early shoulder flexion, or you're going to hit IR too soon. Okay. So again, I need to make a space, and then I can create internal rotation on top of it. So what happens when you have posterior lower compression, as soon as they start to elevate the arm in what would be considered traditional flexion, they're moving into an IR position.
Okay.
And then they run out of IR very, very quickly. And now you have a limitation in what appears to be shoulder flexion. That's right. So you need to have a better starting position. So I have to have that posterior lower expansion first. Then I will transition through internal rotation. Again, it's a gradient. They're both there all the time, right? But if you start from a position that's biased towards internal rotation, you're going to be losing internal rotation very, very quickly, because there's not enough space, because I don't have enough ER to create the IR. So if I take ER, if ER is this big, and then I have all the IR in between, if ER is this big, that's all the IR I'm going to have too. Does that make sense? So you've got to create the AP expansion. So again, this person's going to be kind of a sideline, unilateral activities. Keep them below. You can keep them below shoulder level.
Right.
There's a lot of things you can do under those circumstances, right? Create the expansion, and then just use your test retest.
Okay.
Something simple that doesn't hurt. Okay.
Yeah,
You know,
definitely.
yeah.
Cool.
And make
Yeah,
sure
no,
they do a little bit, make sure they do a little bit of homework for you. Give them like
right.
one activity to do at home and say, you know what, I need you to do this every day. So they're
So
constantly,
something like a kettlebell arm bar, something like that, something
I
along
don't know
those
if I do
lines.
anything loaded with them at home. I think you can do like a rolling activity at home. I think that's very reasonable. But again, it's like let's take some of the load out of it so they can just work on the movement, the orientation, let the floor do some of the work for them, right? So you get some of the, like, as soon as you roll to your side, you're going to get anterior posterior expansion,
Okay,
right?
gotcha.
Let that do some of the work for you, but doing it consistently so that they're reinforcing what you're capturing while they're working out.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great.
All right, man.
Awesome. Thank you so much.